What if I told you the most dangerous monster in horror was not a demon, a slasher, or a curse, but a genie who gives you exactly what you asked for? Maybe that is why there is a saying that goes, "Be careful what you wish for." And this was exactly the genius idea behind Wishmaster, a franchise that introduced one of horror's smartest villains, the Djinn, back in the late 1990s. He was an ancient nightmare caged in a jewel who was keen on twisting every wish into something wicked. So yes, he was not some fairy tale genie like the one we saw in Disney's Aladdin. That is why he feels like the lawyer of nightmares, armed with supernatural abilities and a cruel understanding of wording. If you wish for eternal beauty, he can make that come true in the most horrifying way possible. If you wish to walk through prison bars, he can fulfill that too, but in the cruelest literal way imaginable. And if his chosen victim chooses all three wishes, it can open the doorway for the entire Djinn race to enter Earth, which I think is even scarier. But after such an interesting premise, the franchise faded out quietly. Then again, what if we do get a reboot in the most unexpected way? As of now, there is no official reboot announcement, but the concept still feels ready for a comeback. So here is everything we know and everything we can hope for from a possible Wishmaster reboot. Why Wishmaster still feels like a reboot waiting to happen. Before we get started with the main point of discussion, let me take you back to the 1980s and 1990s, when Wes Craven had already reshaped horror through characters like Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street, and later through self-aware horror like Scream. Around the same time in 1997, Craven's name helped bring attention to director Robert Kurtzman and writer Peter Atkins' dark fantasy horror movie Wishmaster. To be clear, Craven was an executive producer and presenter on the film, not the director or writer. The film was directed by Robert Kurtzman and written by Peter Atkins. Taking a few more steps back, the film reportedly began as an idea from Live Entertainment, which wanted to create an evil genie character with franchise potential, similar to how Freddy Krueger had become the center of A Nightmare on Elm Street. That is why the studio hired Peter Atkins, who was already known for his work on the Hellraiser sequels. Live gave Atkins different reference materials related to Djinn mythology, including encyclopedia entries and books dealing with Eastern traditions around the Djinn. In approaching the Djinn, Atkins took inspiration from the kind of commanding, articulate menace associated with characters like Pinhead. With all that background set, the movie delivered a premise that first opened in 12th century Persia. In the beginning, we see a ruler wishing to see wonders, and a mysterious voice replies, "As you wish." Some might expect beauty, magic, and miracles, but the scene instead shows horrific visuals, with people transformed into monsters, bodies mutilated, and chaos spreading through the place. Before more destruction can unfold, the creature behind it all is trapped inside a jewel, where he remains imprisoned for centuries. Then the scene cuts to 1990s America, where wealthy collector Raymond Beaumont sees a Persian statue accidentally destroyed by a drunk crane operator, leading to the discovery of an opal by a dock worker. Now, we know what the opal is. It eventually ends up at Regal Auctioneers, where gemologist Alexandra Amberson unknowingly awakens the Djinn. The Djinn then begins manipulating people's fears and desires, tricking them into making wishes that backfire in horrific ways, including turning a woman into a mannequin and taking a man's sight when he says he does not want to see the Djinn anymore. That is how cruel the Djinn was. And I have to say, Wishmaster may not have been as mysterious as Scream or as iconic as Hellraiser, but it really pulled off its concept pretty well, especially considering the low budget it had. The movie also had Andrew Divoff, the Venezuelan-born actor, as the main villain. He brought something to the Djinn that I do not think many other actors could have captured. That level of creepiness and operatic menace felt theatrical, but in the most unsettling way possible. And that is not all. Wishmaster also brought several notable horror actors onto the screen. Robert Englund, who played Freddy Krueger in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, appears as an art collector, Raymond Beaumont. Kane Hodder, who played Jason Voorhees in several Friday the 13th films, appears as a security guard. The film also features horror names like Tony Todd and Reggie Bannister, helping it feel like a gathering of genre icons. The Rise, Sequels, and the Andrew Divoff Problem. The movie had a small budget of around $5 million and managed to make around $15 million worldwide, which means it performed well enough for a lean horror production. Live Entertainment clearly had hopes of turning it into a series. Even though the movie received negative reviews from many critics at first, there were also some positive responses. One critic from the Times of Northwest Indiana gave it a B+ and praised it as a low-budget fright flick that was respectful of its influences and its audience. The studio gave the sequel a shot in 1999 with Wishmaster 2: Evil Never Dies, which was released directly to video. I know that it was already a step down from being shown in the theaters, but Andrew Divoff returned for the sequel, and that mattered. I have to give it to the filmmakers because they managed to make some smart choices with their limited budget. A big part of the story takes place in a prison, which was a clever decision that actually added to the film's unique style. It created darkly funny moments as the Djinn uses the wishes of inmates in wicked ways. Some fans really enjoyed what they did with that setup. But then something unexpected happened. We got 2 more Wishmaster movies in 2001 and 2002, but both arrived without Andrew Divoff. What happened was that Divoff had written his own idea for a third sequel, titled Wishmaster: The Third Millennium, which would have tied into Y2K anxiety and large-scale supernatural chaos. Andrew himself described an opening involving an American warship getting struck by a missile in Asia, and a United Nations meeting being interrupted by creatures coming to life and tearing through the crowd. Unfortunately, when he presented the script, the studio rejected it because the scale and effects would have been too expensive for the kind of budget they had. Andrew explained in an interview that his version overshot what could realistically be expected from the budget, with elements like gargoyles coming to life and descending from buildings. He said the budget for that version outweighed the rest of the films. However, I should mention that despite departing, he remained on good terms with people around the franchise, which is probably why he has often voiced how much he would love to return as the Djinn in a future installment. When Andrew went the other way, John Novak took over as the Djinn in the third and fourth movies. In both of those movies, the franchise tried new ideas. For instance, the third movie plays with the idea of wishing for the Archangel Michael to protect the heroine, while the fourth film has the main character unintentionally complicate the Djinn's plan by wishing to love him for who he really is. However, die-hard fans really felt Andrew Divoff's absence in every scene. By 2002, what started as an exciting horror franchise had quickly turned into something people found in bargain bin DVD sections just 5 years later. And sadly, no one came to its rescue. But none of this hits harder than the fact that Divoff did not walk away from the Djinn character emotionally. He has repeatedly mentioned that he would love to be back. In the same interview cycle, Andrew said that if he had one wish, it would be Wishmaster 5, and that he would love to do it again, while also saying that the franchise has a lot of life left in it, whether he is involved or not. And this says a lot because he is not demanding ownership, nor is he saying that the franchise is nothing without him. He simply wants to come back and be part of it, which matters because he hopes just like the fans hope. As of June 2026, Andrew Divoff is still remembered warmly by horror fans for the role, and horror coverage as recently as 2025 continued discussing why he did not return for the third and fourth films. But mind you, if they decide to create a new version of the movie that includes Andrew Divoff's return, or even cast him in a whole new role, similar to how legacy actors have returned in franchises like Halloween, it would add an emotional twist that audiences would probably appreciate. Still, as of June 2026, there are no reliable announcements, no signed reboot deal reported by major trades, no director attached, and no confirmed new film. Who owns Wishmaster and why that matters? Then again, who has the rights and whether they are interested also matters in this whole reboot conversation, does it not? The original movie was released by Live Entertainment, which I mentioned earlier. Live later became part of the corporate path that led into Artisan Entertainment, and Artisan was eventually acquired by Lionsgate. Today, Lionsgate is strongly associated with the Wishmaster catalog through home video releases. For example, all 4 films were released in 2017 as the Wishmaster Collection through Lionsgate's Vestron Video Collector Series. That matters because Lionsgate has a long history with horror, from catalog releases to franchises like Saw. So the idea of Wishmaster eventually being revived is not impossible. But again, there is a big difference between a company owning or distributing a catalog title and actively developing a reboot. As of now, I found no credible trade confirmation that a new Wishmaster film is officially in production. What would make all of this even better is adding Peter Atkins into the mix, because he was the original writer of the first movie, and he is still connected connected to the material. Around 2020, Encyclopocalypse Publications partnered with Peter Atkins to finally bring out a Wishmaster novelization based on his original screenplay. The novelization was written by Christian Francis and officially presented as being based on Atkins' script. To me, that feels like a sign that no one needs to start completely from scratch. The original creative brain behind the screenplay is still around, and the mythology still has untapped potential. That is probably why horror writers and fans keep bringing up the idea of a reboot. In September 2025, CBR published an editorial arguing that, 28 years later, Wes Craven's Faustian horror franchise still deserves a reboot. The piece framed Wishmaster as a cult title that deserves rediscovery by a new generation. Why a modern Wishmaster could actually work. When we watch the 1990s Wishmaster now, of course we can enjoy it as a cult horror film. But back then, it did not reach its full potential because movies of that type often struggled to balance horror, dark fantasy, camp, mythology, and franchise building. That happened with Wishmaster as well. Some scenes feel imaginative, while others feel like they are fighting against budget limitations and uneven tone. But now, almost 30 years later, we have entered a new era of well-made, intense horror reboots, legacy sequels, and streaming platform revivals. Classic properties like Halloween, Hellraiser, Wrong Turn, Candyman, Alien, and 28 Days Later have either returned already or are being extended for new audiences. Some of these came back with fresh takes, while others returned closer to their original roots. And since we have so many talented horror filmmakers working today, I can say with my fingers crossed that there are plenty of people who could do justice to what Wishmaster tried to create. Of course, I am well aware that Wishmaster was not as famous as some of its contemporaries, but the concept is still intriguing. In fact, it may feel fresh to audiences who have never seen the original films. A modern reboot could lean harder into legalistic horror, dark fantasy, ancient mythology, and brutal wish logic. Imagine a version where the Djinn is not just a monster killing people in creative ways, but a supernatural contract predator who understands human desire better than humans do. That is where the franchise could really thrive today. It could become a horror story about wording, temptation, greed, grief, and regret. And in the age of social media, viral fame, influencer culture, online scams, and people constantly wishing for better lives, the premise might be more relevant than ever. It would be exciting to see a reboot done with the kind of seriousness and slick horror fantasy atmosphere that recent reboots like Hulu's Hellraiser attempted. I know it has not happened yet, but for some reason the idea has never felt more natural either. The property is still available in the culture, the villain still has fans. Andrew Devoff still wants the franchise to live, and horror audiences are more open than ever to forgotten cult properties being rediscovered. So what are your thoughts on Wishmaster? Is it really coming soon, or are we just throwing darts in the dark? For now, the honest answer is that we are still in the hope stage. There is no official reboot, no confirmed studio announcement, no cast, no director, and no release date. But the foundation is absolutely there. The original film had a killer premise, a memorable villain, a strong horror pedigree, and enough mythology to support a much bigger story. Andrew Devoff's Djinn remains one of the most underrated horror villains of the 1990s, and the idea of wishes turning into nightmares still works beautifully. If the right filmmaker ever gets the chance to revive it, Wishmaster could become far more than nostalgia. It could become one of the smartest horror comebacks of the modern era. Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Until next time, thanks for watching.